You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. We'll take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Hello everybody, and welcome to another startling edition of the Out There Hour.
The Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay! Yay!
Good morning.
Good evening.
And good afternoon.
To the Middle East.
Africa.
America.
The world.
And whoever's in between.
Interesting show today.
Very fascinating today. Lots of topics. Lots of topics.
Lots of topics involved. It's quite complicated.
Yeah, it's going to be a long one.
It's going to be a long one. I'm going to try and wrap it up in a nutshell as best I can.
Oh, do it.
What if we were
yes,
an advanced civilization?
What if one day, maybe?
In the ancient times.
Aha.
And we faced a great global catastrophe.
Yep.
Which wiped out most of the human race.
Yes.
And left a few stragglers.
Stragglers, yeah.
And left us with great constructions like the pyramids and Stonehenge.
Yep.
And things like that.
Yep. Mayan pyramids.
And nobody can remember what they're for.
They don't really seem to have a great use. Some of them, certainly.
That's roughly what the show is about. But we're going to have...
and what happened... What happened to us? What happened to them? Where did we come from? What's coming next?
And a little bit about a guy called Jesus.
Oh, yeah, Jesus, yeah. I remember him, yeah. Married guy, 3 kids.
That's him. That's the one.
Rabbi, I think he was.
Yeah.
Well,
should we get our wonderful guest, Edmund?
Edmund Marriage is on the show, everybody. He is an expert in such things. We're going to get him on shortly. After what?
Advert.
Yeah, I hope you'll excuse me. I just wanted to play the piano just a little bit here, and I hope you don't mind. In fact, my nurse Chloe is going to join me on the flute here for just a little bit, if that's okay with you. I just thought that it would be time to do something fun here in the music room. But you know, you don't have to listen to things like this. There are better things you could be listening to, like Alternative Future Radio. And it's so easy now with their new Android application. You could download it for just $1.99. And then you wouldn't have to listen to me play the piano. And my nurse Chloe play her flute. Find out more at alternativefutureradio.com. It's just $1.99. And PayPal will even bill you in your currency if you're not smart enough to be using dollars.
Okay, so hopefully on the line we should now have Mr. Edmund Marriage. Do we have you there, Edmund?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. How are you today, Edmund?
I'm very well indeed, very well. Been looking at my notes on your website and all ready to go.
Brilliant. Now, actually, I want to start off with a small tale, because I actually got an email back from, I think it was from yourself, in regard to an inquiry. I was actually looking for a chap called, let me get this right, was it Lawrence Gardner? And he's written a number of books on. I was looking for somebody to talk about the Holy Grail, and his name came up.
That's right, Lawrence Gardner.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, he's since died, which is, well, regrettable, obviously.
Right.
But we were talking about this with somebody the other week. We were looking for guests from all sorts of different things around the world, different topics, and a disproportionate amount of them had actually died, and he was the one who actually spurred me on to mention it on the show just the other week, because about 40% of the people that we found that we wanted to interview were no longer alive.
Don't worry, Edmund. I'm sure you're safe.
We must stop telling guests this on air, because I think we're going to freak them out a little bit. But yeah, the Holy Grail was where we started on this. But I mean, where do you want to go on this, Edmund? Shall we say start at the beginning? Is that too far away?
Is it even possible?
That's right. Lawrence Gardner was a dear friend of mine, and I saw a lot of him over the last 5 or 6 years, particularly the year up to his death last year. And I thought his work was extremely important. It was very, very well referenced. An incredible amount of work, and something like 8 or 9 books which sold extremely well. And I get a terrific amount of feedback from people who want to know about Lawrence's work.
Yeah.
And so I've found his work valuable, and I'm helping to promote The Origin of God, which has gone out now, but the next book is called The Revelation of the Devil, which was his last book. And that's due literally any moment now from the printer. And that will tell the story of how we believe in the devil or don't believe in the devil. And that's full of excitement for people who want to round off the whole subject of where religion has got us to in terms of control and misinformation, which is very sad, because while we have divisions, religious divisions on this planet and political divisions, things can only get worse. And I'll come back to that about the Golden Age, where there was no need for anybody to argue about religion or politics. And religion, in fact, didn't even exist as we know it. And so the Lawrence Gardner angle is particularly important when we're working through to see what we need to change today to make the world a better place.
Okay, Edmund, now I spoke to you a bit earlier, just before we start recording, and I think to sum it up in one line, your research and your website, we were an advanced civilization. There was a global catastrophe.
Yes, if we look back on the conventional records, in other words, conventional archaeology, we're told that we don't have any humans going back the female side about 150, 180,000 BC, the mitochondrial Eve. And then we're told that Adam came along much later, and that everybody on the planet, whatever color, whatever they are, has a line back to a single male Y chromosome marker called the 158 marker at about 50 to 60,000 BC. So Adam came a long time after Eve, and that's accepted by the establishment. The other thing that's accepted by the establishment is that the first 2 chromosomes are fused, but nobody seems to tell us what effect that has on us, other than the fact that the fusing of a chromosome is not a mutation. It's something that can only be done, if you like, by advanced technology. So that sets the stage for a Cro-Magnon man, who clearly had a large brain, was very tall, taller than us, and we see all the Cro-Magnon peoples around the west coast of Africa, Spain, France, on the Atlantic seaboard, and all of a sudden our toolkit, if you like, has jumped from 10 or 11 basic objects to maybe as many as 100 different specific tools that can be identified at about 36, 40,000 BC. But over that period of time, from say 40,000 BC to now, the planet's climate has been very hostile, with massive swings in temperature. And many scientists will tell you now, and again, straight-line academic specialists will tell you that the planet was so hostile that it's very unlikely that agriculture could have taken place anywhere back to about 50,000 BC. But the one candidate we have for agriculture is the area of the Azores, warmed by a warm current from the Gulf of Mexico, etc., and where we can look at coral and ocean temperatures. And during for example, the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, then were reasonably favorable conditions, maybe even for 2 crops a year for anybody living on a large island on the site of the Azores.
Well, Dr. Webster Tarpley mentions, he's a historian, and he mentions weather as well. And he says in the Middle Ages in Britain, it was warm enough to grow tropical fruit, but and then at a later stage in Britain at the 18th century, there was people skating on the Thames. It was so deeply frozen, and actually having fairs and markets on it.
That's right. That was called the Maunder minimum, when we had no sunspots at all, and when the Thames froze over, and it was an incredibly difficult period in times of human survival. And we go back actually if we go back to the Holocene climatic optimum, we're going back to 4,200, say, when the planet was much warmer than it is now. And that's the time where we see the first farmers coming from the Near East, simply because farming had been so successful, the population expanded, and people migrated with their city-state sophistication and arrived on the coast of Ireland at Side Fields, which is C-E-I-D-E, Side Fields. We have the first evidence of really sophisticated organization, communal organization in rectangular fields, large fields, stone walls, forests cleared for the mixed farming system. And then, of course, the climate changed, and the whole of that area is now covered by 5 or 6 feet of peat. Yeah. And so our whole history, going back to, for a long while, let's say to the start of the Holocene. Now, the start of the Holocene was 9,400, 9,500 BC, after the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, which I'll come to the cause of that in a minute. But we've had so many ups and downs, and it means that populations of people have thrived and prospered under good climatic conditions, and then been wiped out by natural catastrophes or by disease or by bad weather. And so the human populations over the last 10,000 years have moved backwards and forwards to the favorable areas in which to live. But most of the diffusion has come from the Near East, so the Eastern Mediterranean. And so the Eastern Mediterranean has fed the world with people and technology and skills, etc.
So historically speaking, So historically speaking, climate change is nothing new.
Climate change, climate's been always changing in the past. It's changed incredibly severely and rapidly, not due to man-made activities, but to the variations in solar activity, which is about the variations in what's arriving in our solar system from space. And the key is the sunspots, whether there are a lot or whether there aren't any, the heliosphere, which protects us from radiation. And when the sun is weak, the heliosphere is weak, and then the cosmic rays come through the heliosphere. Our own planet's magnetic field is weaker, and if we get loads of cosmic rays, that creates low-level clouds, and those low-level clouds cause the sea temperatures to cool, and the sea temperatures, when they're cooled, get the land to cool, and we have the snow, if you like, rather than warmer weather. So it's a very complex chain of events. And our scientists need to look at the big picture of our whole Milky Way system, and we duck and dive through areas where we have stronger and weaker cosmic radiation. And you can find more information on that on the Golden Age Project website, on the technical detail.
That's very important, Edmund, because at the moment the solution to climate change seems to be paying carbon taxes to the European Union. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, I'm afraid I followed this I went to the first ever climate change meetings in this country in a political advisory capacity, and I said that it is the sun which is driving our climate, and that even if we did want to change things, we could never afford to do it. I'm glad to say that last year, CERN, the scientists at CERN in Switzerland, confirmed the research of the Danish Space Agency, a man called Svenmark, in particular, and confirmed this cosmic ray theory, proved it. But of course, our scientists are so blinkered and stuck on mistakes, they don't want to change their minds. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
There is a climatologist stroke weatherman called... sorry. There was a little delay there. There's a climatologist stroke weatherman called Piers Corbyn. You may have heard of him. He's been going on for some years saying that the sun is the source of climate change and it affects the weather and so on and so forth, a lot more than people believe. And as you say, you took the words out of my mouth. Recently there have been some instances of proof towards that, and I've been convinced of that for years, that the sun was linked to weather, because even basic research, you can see very quickly that there is a correlation between sunspots and weather patterns. How that's not generally accepted science is unbelievable.
Well, Piers Corbyn is one of the leading voices, independent thinkers, and we all have to make our own minds up about things and not follow blindly what we're told and taught. Yeah. And of course, the real issue is CO2 harmful? Of all the greenhouse gases, CO2 amounts to 0.04% of the total, and it's the heaviest one, so it's sitting close to the ground anyway, where it's needed by the plants.
Yes.
And so most of the greenhouse gas is water vapor, 85-90%.
Yeah.
And so the whole argument is totally unsound if you actually look and see that CO2 is highly beneficial, and it's what feeds our forests, our plants, our rainforests, etc.
The statistics I heard, Edmund, were that humans only create around about 7% of the world's CO2, and of that 5% is locked in water. Is that about right?
I'm sure that's about right. And then you have a super volcano or a big volcano going off in Iceland, and putting out more CO2 in a short space of time than we have for hundreds of years. And it's the same argument that the 1/3 of the CO2 on the planet was being caused by peat bog fires in Indonesia, where people were clearing the rainforest to plant palm oil and other crops, and had burnt the forest, and the forests, that fire had gone into the peat beneath those forests, and those massive peat fires had created a CO2 situation, 1/3 of all the world's CO2. And of course, methane is another issue, which is, I believe, 30 or 40 times more powerful than CO2 in terms of intensity. And methane has been bubbling up out of the ground and the oceans for thousands of years.
I was just about to say, I think the oceans are actually the world's largest CO2 producer, are they not? Maybe I've got that wrong. Maybe it's methane.
Yes, yeah.
And on Earth, farming is the biggest producer of I think, CO2 and methane, something that none of us can contribute towards in any way, shape or form. Well, maybe yourself, because I know you have a history of farming, but most people...
It depends on the farming. If the cows are going to be eating grass and grass-type products, they are in themselves a carbon sink. Yeah. And their food crops offset any gases which are given out by the actual cows themselves. So it's a neutral situation. In fact, it's a neutral to favourable situation in terms of carbon for all our grass-fed beef in this country. In Ireland, you know how much grass-fed meat and milk there is. It's the same in this country.
All of it, in fact.
and the uplands of Britain, for example, are absolutely crucial because they need grazing animals for them to keep in top condition for a whole range of wildlife and the beautiful landscapes that we all enjoy.
So getting back to
we went off one.
We went off on one on carbon tax because I
can't help myself.
We're a bit anti.
Well, that's right, and it's the major issue today, of yet more money being wasted unnecessarily, while children are starving all over the world.
Exactly.
And I think it was Chief Sitting Bull said that white man can make everything, but can't distribute it. And he was right. So we need really to stop politics and religion and if you like, climate change has become
maybe we'll come back to that.
A dogma, and so all those people out there, hopefully you've got open minds, you're going to make your own mind up about things and just get a few ideas from me, I hope. And I'm not going to indoctrinate you.
Exactly. So it's going to be a big open question.
Yes.
The pyramids, Stonehenge, Easter Island, the Mayan pyramids, the Aztec pyramids, remnants of a lost civilization. What are your thoughts on that, Edmund?
No doubt at all. We had great sophistication. Christian O'Brien, in his books, The Genius of the Few and the Shining Ones, and importantly, his book called The Path of Light, is about what Jesus was actually teaching. We're all dealing with, originally, an advanced civilization, a civilization that was capable of building the Great Pyramid and an even more fantastic pyramid at Abu Rawash, which was the last pyramid built above Cairo, which was unfortunately plundered.
I've been there.
All the domestication of crops and animals, taking agriculture around the world, all the technology and many of the seeds around the world in a period of 2,000 years from the start at 9,400. And the start was in southern Lebanon, close to Mount Hermon, and our culture bearers were the archangels, angels, and watchers. They're all there in our records. The problems we have are the mistranslations, misunderstandings, use of lots of different names for the same people.
Yes.
And we can track back and see that there was a small group of survivors from this horrific Cataclysm at 10,850 or thereabouts. They managed to survive, and obviously they would have lived and died rather like us, but they managed to survive through so they could restart agriculture at the end of the Younger Dryas Ice Age. Now, the Younger Dryas Ice Age, or the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, was as cold as anything in the last 100,000 years. It was snowball Earth, essentially. Up to 40% of the planet was frozen. The conditions were horrific. And that was caused by this terrible catastrophe, which would have put goodness knows how much dust and debris and destruction up into the air, and kept the sun out, if you like. And that's well recorded. It's on the on my website, and it's there in the Earth Under Fire section. And you can look at the work of Paul Laviolette and also Richard Firestone, and many others, Allen and Dallaire, who wrote Cataclysm, the geologists, and many other people now are all drawing this information together. The exact detail is something that is still debated and argued about, but science is helping to confirm that that was a horrific period of time for the Earth, with the biggest mass extinction for 3 million years at 10,850 or thereabouts.
Edmund, I have a little bit of interest in Egyptology and ancient Egyptology. I've been there a number of times. The date 10,500 BC is the date I'd heard, or thereabouts. Let's not split hairs over a few hundred years. But that date crops up around the world in various ancient structures. I mean, in Cairo, you've obviously got, in Giza, you've got the Sphinx, which I think, if I remember correctly, sees Leo rise straight in front of it, 10,500 BC. It's also got water erosion marks, which apparently is 10,500 BC is when the Nile flooded that high, and it's a hell of a high place, is Giza Plateau. Then you've got things such as the star chambers in the Great Pyramid, which line up with Orion, 10,500 BC. That date seems to ring through history, and it's not just Giza, is it? It's around the world, that date.
It's well known, well accepted. I think that if you and I are talking about the Great Pyramid, I concede and agree that the Sphinx must be older than the pyramids.
I think so, yeah.
Whether it's a dog, Anubis, whether it's a cheetah is a debatable point. I put forward the view that it might be a cheetah, which is a quite extraordinary animal, which was genetically engineered. It's got all the bits of a dog and a cat, and it's unique, and it would have been a perfect pet to have on the savannah to bring home supper. And they are essentially, they behave like a domesticated animal today. And their distribution, it would have been one of the greatest scientific achievements of all time for those people. And if they were going to remember something that they personally liked, to do a massive statue of a cheetah would have been reasonable. Alternatively, Robert Temple's view is that it was Anubis. But we may find out one day that some of these things are speculative. We have to take a stab at what we think it is and see whether we're find somebody else with a better idea. But the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, I don't think I think the pyramids are quite well dated, and remember that we had about 100 pyramids built on the Giza plateau over about 100 years, and so there was a great spate of pyramid building on the Giza plateau. If we look at Saqqara, for example, which is a step pyramid, we find an identical structure in Peru at the same date as the Saqqara pyramid. And there are commonalities all over the world simply because our angels and our watchers, culture bearers, had traveled around the world and taken technologies all around the world. And we even find this, I've been looking recently at the extraordinary shape of the skulls at Paracas. And in the same way, we had evidence of unbelievable skills in engineering crops. Now, that wasn't just one mutation for wheat and barley. It was 10 different characteristics that changed a wild barley or a wild wheat into a domesticated crop that's remained almost perfect ever since.
Going back to Saqqara there, before we went onto agriculture, is that I know that Saqqara, it was Zoser II was the pharaoh, I think, for Saqqara. His advisor was Imhotep, made famous of the film The Mummy and things. He also advised Khufu, Khafre, and so on. He's the guy who came up with the actual concept from, according to accepted history, of the pyramid shape, because they had the mustabas before, like the single level, two level things, and then they came up with this pyramid idea from seemingly nowhere. He's attributed with coming up with it. Could he have been one of these messengers of ancient knowledge, perhaps, that survived this cataclysm?
I'm sure he was a senior druid, if you like, a senior clever man, brilliant man, who passed the knowledge down from father to son. And that's how society worked. You had a king was appointed or actually elected on merit. From the leading families, but it was not always. Sometimes it could be outside that. But they wanted the best man for the job, who was advised by a council of elders who were the master craftsmen in all the various trades. So Imhotep may well have been the master craftsman in that masonry trade, and may have been the ideal man to advise. What seems to have happened is that the high high technology skills seem to have existed right the way through over a long period of time. But the Menes, who was the first king at this at what we call the start of real progress in Egypt, Menes was in fact the son of Sargon I, and the Sargon I dates have to be correctly put in place at about 2,700, 2,800. But Menes, who was the king, was in fact the son of Sargon, and he was governor of the Indus Valley colony, and he was a Sumerian. And the Sumerians had to leave the Mesopotamian plains because of drought and the monsoon rains moving south. And Egypt was still an okay place to go because of the waters from the Nile. And so you have actually a big settlement of the Sumerians in Egypt, although the so-called Shining Ones had been in Egypt many thousand years before. And you go to Hierakonpolis, 3,500 BC, great sophistication. And then you go back to the Bardarian pottery, 5,000, 5,500 BC. So there always was great sophistication in Egypt, which had come from the same source, which is the original group from southern Lebanon. So everything evolved out of Lebanon, from Tyre and Sidon, and of course Damascus, those three being the oldest cities in the world. And that's where the knowledge came from. And the actual settlement was called Karsag, which meant head enclosure, and head enclosure was the place where the angels, the watchers, and the archangels drove their operation from about 9,500 BC to 6,000 BC, when it was destroyed by another cataclysm, which may have been connected to a large object going into the Indian Ocean. And extremely wet weather, floods, and all the floods and destruction within the Bekaa and the Jordan Rift Valley, which shows up at Jericho.
Edmund, you mentioned the Watchers, the Archangels, the Culture Bearers, the Shining Ones. Who are they, or who were they?
Well, if you look at all the biblical texts, you'll see loads of references to the Elohim, which is the, if you like, the Hebraic version of events.
Yeah.
They're the Neteru in Egypt, and they're the Vedas. All around the world, you see this reference to the shining ones, the bright and shining ones, the ones who were a shining example, if you like. And the Gina, in Arabic, it was the Genii, geniuses. And so there are all sorts of names linked in here. One of the important little bits of history to remember is that Buddha himself, who was a Druid, and got his message from the British Druids. Buddha said, follow then the shining ones, the wise, the awakened, the loving, for they know how to work and forbear. And so if you read Zechariah Sitchin, we're talking about the Anunnaki. If you're talking about O'Brien, which is a far more accurate and reliable source for translations of the cuneiform, O'Brien calls them the Ananuki. And these are the god An. The leader of the group was called An. His two sons were called Enil and Enki. And the half-sister was originally Ninil, who became Ninkarsag. And she was the biologist who worked with Enki in the building of knowledge to produce the crops that were required. And Enil was not Lord of the Wind. That was a mistranslation. His picture sign was of a flower pot, which meant he was lord of the cultivation rather than lord of the wind. And those four characters are the key figures in this whole story. And then we have the key leaders, and then 7 archangels, and then we have the third order of craftsmen, who are the watchers. And in fact, to make it even more complicated, the archangels were the 2-eyed serpents, which meant they had 2 eyes open, watching. And the angels were the 1-eyed serpents. And then, of course, the third order of craftsmen were the watchers, who came in teams of 10, 50, 100, incredibly well organized. The watchers were represented on the Anunnaki Council. We then have what's called the Divine Council of the Gods, first at Karsag in Enel's great house, which overlooked the basin, and then it moved from there to Baalbek at the head of the 2 rivers, which was not the Tigris and Euphrates, but was the Orontes and the Litani. And we have that extraordinary structure at Baalbek, much older than people realize. And, of course, that was where everybody in the world went to, even before Delphi, to pay their respects to the gods.
But why was the Anunnaki and the Elohim so advanced? Was it just evolution? I mean, how did they, become such leaders?
Well, they had the knowledge, that's the point, and they carried that knowledge with them. And what we have is, the archaeological story is interesting, because if we take the town of Jericho, which is very close to the Dead Sea, at about 700 feet below sea level.
The oldest town, is that right, Jericho?
That's right. Yeah. We have what's called pre-pottery Neolithic A, and then what's called pre-pottery Neolithic B. Well, between A and B, there was an extraordinary change from very primitive round houses to very sophisticated square houses with porches.
Okay.
We have the building of the tower at Jericho with stonework that wouldn't disgrace a medieval castle. We have it lime plastered inside and out, and some of that plaster is still there, sticking to that tower. Now, lime is a very complex process in order to produce lime, certainly to produce lime cement that lasts for 9,000 or 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And, of course, lime is very important, because when you burn limestone to get lime, you have got that crucial fertilizer for neutralizing the pH or the acidity of the soil. So lime is a crucial component of the very early stages of agriculture. Now, at Jericho, not only did we have all those features, but we had a massive rock-cut ditch out of solid rock right round the original city, the wall and the tower. A similar cut ditch goes out across the Rishaya Basin, which is Karsag, which you can see from the Google images and all the details on the Golden Age Project website. And so then we look for the domestication of crops, and we find exactly the same dates, 9,200 to 9,300, on the recalibration of dates, which is another subject, but very important. And then we have the first domesticated fig, quite different to the wild fig. We have the first domesticated barley. A little bit further up near Karsag, we have the first domesticated wheats. And certainly crops like the chickpea, the peas, the beans, the vetches, about 24 of the original founder crops are all found in that area, all arriving at the same place around the same time, along with the domesticated sheep, pigs. Cattle come a little later, but that's mainly because we haven't found the evidence of them being any earlier. So we have an extraordinary, practical, proven situation of great sophistication suddenly arriving, creating the oldest city on the planet, which is, I think, is no doubt is linked to Göbekli Tepe. which isn't a temple. It's they're all roof supports. 160 fabulous prefabricated roof supports carved out of limestone. The roof would have been timber. It would have been rather like a long barrow with a really solid roof covered in earth.
Yes.
And the reason people say, oh, it was all buried, was only because the roof eventually rotted and collapsed. And what was on the roof, which was solid earth and soil, came through, and it looked as though the whole place had been filled in. But that kind of structure was crucial at those times for taking cover from the wrath of the gods or from the sky falling. But back to Jericho. Jericho, you have all the component parts. It's linked to Karsag. Karsag has an unbelievable watercourse, 1.5 miles long, perfect conditions, detailed descriptions given by Enoch, detailed descriptions too in the Bible. But more important, the whole record was put down in the very earliest Sumerian texts in what are called the Karsag epics or the Karsag documents.
Yes.
The professor who translated it as Karsag was the Reverend Professor George Barton at the Quaker Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. And he did what nearly everybody else did at those times, was made a religious interpretation, rather like Göbekli Tepe, oh, it must be a temple. Everybody assumes it's religious. And George Barton thought the Karsag texts were incantations and hymns. Well, it took Christian O'Brien to come along and properly translate over 80% of the Karsag epics, because what he did, and nobody else has done, is realize that the Sumerian cuneiform evolved from picture signs. The picture signs you see on the Phaistos disc, the picture signs you see in the earliest Sumerian writing. And the cuneiform evolved from that and changed over time under the supervision of scribes. So if you're Zechariah Sitchin or modern-day Akkadians and looking at the Sumerian language, if you're starting from 1000 BC or 1500 BC and working backwards, it's actually impossible to translate it properly. You have to understand that it evolved from the picture language, and first of all, be able to translate the 400 or 500 basic picture signs, which were in operation way before 5000 BC. So what we've done, as with all our biblical records, we've passed one down to the other. We've translated them from one language to another.
Yes.
So the cuneiform, so the Hebrew records went through 4 or 5 stages of a cuneiform before they were put into a format by Ezra in the exile of the Hebrews in Babylon. And then everybody learnt it by heart. So that when Ptolemy Philadelphus, under the instructions of his wife in Alexandria, said, well, let's get all the Hebrew elders down and record their history, and 72 of them went to Alexandria, each went into a different room, and the scribes wrote down what each said, and they'd all remembered the whole of the basic books, early books by heart. They did also actually say there were some very wonderful things told by the Hebrew elders, which were far too outlandish for them to include in the records. But that's another story.
That's interesting.
Yeah. You've mentioned more than one cataclysm or event in your description. I wanted to ask, what do you believe, because I know these things are too long ago to be sure, but what do you believe these events were, and what were they caused by? How many have there been?
Well, I went. There was a very important conference at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge, in '97, when our astrophysicists and some of our more informed geologists and scientists got together to make a list of all the cataclysms and catastrophes and try and work out what they all were.
Yeah.
And there's quite a good list, again, on the website on my lectures. And every week now we're finding out more about many of these particular things. We had a program on television last night about tsunamis. And so we have a whole range of issues. We have this whole business of solar flares, massive discharges from the sun, which may well have something to do with flares blasting through our solar system from the galactic center. We have volcanic eruptions, we have super volcanoes, and we have large lumps of rock that crash every now and again. And Professor Victor Klube is one of the leaders on this subject, will tell you that we are at a centennial risk, 100-year risk of something similar to the Tunguska catastrophe.
Yes, yeah.
Which flattened an area the size of Belgium in, I think it was 1908. So it's a whole range of issues.
Yeah, so you're not saying these are not, because some people might be thinking these things are, some people might be religious and think that they're biblical. Some people might think that they're orchestrated or, intent. But they sound very much like bloody bad luck.
Well, they're problems for the planet, and we're incredibly lucky to survive. If you just think about, we're heading for a population of 9 billion in 30 years' time, and you think what our population has been down to after the Black Death. The population of Britain fell, I think, back down to something like, halved to 4 million.
Yeah.
The whole population dynamics is quite extraordinary. We've managed to increase our population in the last 300 years by an unbelievable number of people. It's never happened before on the history of the Earth, as far as we know.
All driven by oil.
So one's got to, the astronomer royal, Sir Martin Rees, says the chance. With a 50-50 chance of getting through the next 100 years without another major wipeout.
Yeah. Quite recently, there's been a number of asteroids that they've found and big, large meteorites, and they only find them the day before they pass by very, very close. Small, usually, but not always.
Right. That's right. So go dig a hole in the cellar and have your tank of fresh water and tins of beans.
Stock
folks.
up on beans today. We have to say that Edmund's not an affiliate of the Heinz Company.
Well, this takes us back to the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what's your thinking on the Great Pyramid? What was it built for? Did it have a purpose?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I think you find a whole range of structures which we all call megalithic. And I believe that Baalbek is an excellent example of the only reason they would have gone to the trouble they did in putting the bigger stones on top and the smaller stones below. The bigger stones on top were 850 tons.
Yeah.
There were two in the quarry, actually, in the Baalbek quarry, and both, one is 1,400 tons, one is 1,250 tons. They weren't actually put on the platform. And underneath the platform is the Baalbek tell, which is as ancient as any tell on the planet. And so the first concept is you build a big stone structure which isn't going to be blasted away by cometary debris or cosmic radiation or whatever. So there are two things. You have a very big structure to get underneath and put your valuables underneath. If it's a long barrow, you cover your corbelled stone roof with organic, inorganic matter, which is an indication that that's going to help with cosmic radiation or ultraviolet or whatever. But the Great Pyramid itself, there was a whole spate of pyramid building, as I said, and you can see it right there in front of you in Egypt. They were practicing. They were trying to perfect a design for a perfect pyramid, which they got right. They eventually got that right. There were several attempts which failed, but it was all for the same purpose in my mind.
Edmund, which ones were the ones they got right? Was it maybe the Red Pyramid or the Bent Pyramid? Was it one of those ones?
Well, the bent pyramid wasn't quite right, but there was a median pyramid was right, wasn't it? That was a perfect pyramid shape, or almost. But then certainly the Giza plateau was a piece de resistance, the French word. Napoleon would have liked that. And you would, the important one for everybody to go and see, the fabulous pyramid of all, which helps confirm what I'm saying, is Abu Hawash or Rawash, which is above Cairo, where there was a massive area, would have been decked out with timber for people to go inside. 2/3 of it was built with Aswan granite. It would have been the most beautiful structure, and not quite as large as the Great Pyramid, but certainly room for lots of people, a massive water supply, 3 boat pits with boats, the same feature with the Great Pyramid. All the pyramids had boats attached, and they had waterproof doors, or doors that were as good as waterproof or blast-proof. And the doors were halfway up. What they were expecting was the same kind of things that happened in 10,800 with the sea washing around the planet, with the Earth being tipped on its axis, something that would withstand almost a direct blast from cometary debris.
I mean, I've heard some interesting theories about what the pyramids were used for, from messages from aliens and everything else, but from what you're saying, they sound like giant bomb shelters.
I keep an open mind simply because, but I think that it doesn't take much common sense to see that the amount of physical work and labor and expense wouldn't have been spent on the Giza plateau to provide water supplies, to provide food storage, to provide the supporting mastabars, etc. None of that massive expense, centralization, access organized, that was for lots of people to take cover. And I don't defy anybody to challenge.
There wasn't really a lot of room inside them, though, was there? I mean, if you go into the Great Pyramid, there's a couple of chambers, but you know, do we still have you there?
The one that hasn't got a lot of room inside is the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
But it has. If you look at the northern side of the Great Pyramid, there is a massive basalt flooring covering, then covered by limestone, and there's almost certainly massive chambers and structures with water supply, etc., around the outside of that pyramid for people to go into. The other pyramids, there's room inside. If you go to Mexico, you'll find a massive cavern in the middle of the Pyramid of the Sun, etc., etc. So you look at every single pyramid, you find the same basic thesis makes sense.
Yeah.
And remember, too, that every single pyramid was perfectly positioned on an east, west, north, south axis, which took advanced science to produce.
Very hard, even back then. They were less than 1 degree out as well, and they reckon that some of those errors are due to seismic shifts.
Now, the book that does the best job on this is a book called Message from the Ancestors by Paul Gagnon. And I believe that's as well researched as any other book. And what Paul is saying is that the star shafts from the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid point to where the north and south pole stars were exactly when the pyramid was built, which is, I think, reliably put at 2,500 BC. Now, the Queen's Chamber star shafts are a different matter altogether, because they point to where those pole stars were before the Earth was tipped on its axis.
Right.
It's going to all be checked out with the computers we now have. It's the computer work that's so important. But what it looks as though our ancestors had left the Great Pyramid as a specific, special structure for us in case the whole of civilization was wiped out again.
As a calibration tool, or as a marker, or something along those lines.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a bit of interference on the line then. Exactly.
Could it have been? Are you saying it was used maybe as a calibration tool or something to work from?
An astronomical instrument.
if you read a message from the ancestors, you will see the ways in which the various positioning of stones, etc., is a calculator from the point of view of not just telling us what happened in the past, but also for forecasting the reason they went to all this trouble. And that was, they thought there was going to be another wipeout in 2345. Now, that's a tree ring date for the next major catastrophe, which literally finished the Golden Age and destroyed cities right their way across from the Mediterranean to China. And that was a major catastrophe. And that was forecast. Now, the same time, exactly the same time as the Great Pyramid and all those pyramids were being built, there was a flurry of activity almost everywhere on the planet to change the open observatories, like Stonehenge, an open observatory, Rensselaer Do, or whatever it's called in Anglesey, an open observatory, and they were all converted into what the archaeologists called chambered tombs. Now, what was happening here is that their observational astronomy was brilliant, and they had forecast or knew that there were problems coming, and they had converted their observatories into chambered tombs so that the people in that area could take cover. And at Stonehenge, they found another massive, or the remains of a massive structure, the base of a massive structure at the end of the avenue down by the Avon River, which would have been a giant dome and a giant structure for which people could have taken cover under. And so it isn't just the Great Pyramid being built. We can see all around the world similar methods being taken by the astronomer craft or trade, saying, we've got problems, boys, we've got to take cover and do something about it. And you look at the dating, you look at what was going on, you find out how sophisticated their observational astronomy was. It all falls into place and makes sense. To me, anyway, and I think it's beginning to make sense to many other people as well.
Edmund, you were saying that they were beginning to forecast, trouble ahead, but they only had, as you say, sort of visual tools, their eyes. That, as far as we know, they didn't have telescopes or anything. What was it that was so big that they could work it out by eye? And if it's coming again, how come we're not documenting this thing now?
Well, this is the lesson number one for the human race about learning from history. That our ancestors were clever enough to be able to allow a restart of civilization after the massive major catastrophe at 10,800. There's no debate over that now. It's happened. The detail we can argue about. But so we've got a very clear message in the Great Pyramid that the people who set up our fantastic social organization where there was no conflict, but we all worked together for each other, every craft, trade or profession. We all did our best for the community without having priests or politicians to divide us. Very important point. We won't solve the problems of the planet while we have politics and religion creating divisions. One of the reasons that the Queen was so successful this weekend in her praise was that she represents something above politics. She represents, if you like, the traditional head of state and a system that goes back 10,000 years. She's been weakened. She has no real powers. There's all sorts of terrible things have gone wrong, but she's still there, and most of the people in this country feel pretty happy about it because they'd much rather have her and the royal family and that tradition, an excellent centre of excellence in so many departments, particularly for the young soldiers who ride in the Irish Guards or whatever it is. Household cavalry. You have those fabulous traditions still surviving there, where everywhere else the traditions have all been thrown away, and the centres of excellence have all been closed down. Even the our Royal Air Force helicopter search and rescue service was a center of excellence for the very best in that trade or industry. Should never have been closed down and privatized. You find it in every single area. If I want to go and learn how to drive, I want to go and talk to a Hendon Class 1 police driver. And these days, you talk to government and you say, where is the center of excellence for driver training? And they'll point you to the Driving Standards Agency, a Ministry of Transport, or even Top Gear. They're forgotten about who taught the world to drive. And so I'm using those parallels of where we are today and what's gone wrong. And we now have a politician has a problem. He gathers together 7 or 8 scientists.
Yes.
You find none of those scientists have any specialized knowledge in the subject in hand.
That is actually unbelievably common.
So you wonder why they made a complete horlicks of it.
Yeah.
On so many issues right the way through the spectrum. And they won't ask the master craftsmen. They won't ask the people who really know.
Exactly.
And this, we're right back to Imhotep being the master craftsman in charge of masonry, no doubt. And he knew and he thought he could crack the issue of building a pyramid, which was quite a new idea at 2,500 BC.
I must say, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying about the pyramids and Stonehenge being an astronomy instrument, and as you said about bomb shelters, for want of a better word. I wonder,
even if you look at the structures that Michael Tellinger is talking about in South Africa.
Yeah.
Now, I don't for a minute believe those village remains are any older than 7,000 BC, but that's another story. I've said why, but the point was that even Nabata Playa, the very early villages all around the planet, where it's exactly the same kind of remains of the old villages, they laid them out preferably in a circular fashion, but they also aligned them to the whatever it was, the equinoxes or whatever.
Yes.
And you see this. Best example is Malta. If you go to Malta, you find that every single structure is aligned astronomically.
Yes.
All aligned astronomically in the same way, so that they act as a calendar for you.
Which is so cool. But there's one structure that's still a bit of a mystery, I wonder, or is it to you? I don't know. Easter Island. Those monuments on Easter Island.
Yes. Christian O'Brien deals with a whole chapter on Easter Island in the Shining Ones. And I think his view is that it is quite a lot earlier than most people believe or realize. The dates are
Yes.
on dating the statues it should be pushed back. It's contemporary with the Pacific navigators who came both directions from Chile, Bolivia, Peru, and across the Pacific from the Pacific Islands. And I think that the lesson that has been learnt by looking at the Pacific is that the red-haired ones, as they were called, who went into the Pacific, who built the double canoes, had mastered the art of sailing and could go almost anywhere in the Pacific they wanted to. And Brian Forrester has made a very, very good point, which I picked up on his talk at Glastonbury, which was that the elders or leaders went back to the Melanesian islands, to Rukaya, I think it is, for regular meetings to discuss politics, everything else. And so they sailed there, whatever direction. They all knew how to get back to that point and got there very easily with their double canoes. Now, this is exactly what we were seeing with the Druids, going back to the homeland to have regular meetings to discuss what was going on. And the kings did the same thing. The kings all met in Sharipa and had a council of kings. And when there were problems, they appointed the top man for the job, the best man for the job, who was the king of kings, a Shishak. In Greek, it was Ozymandias. And in Saxon world, it was a Bradwald. And in Britain, it was a Pendragon. And he was kings, where they appointed the king. It was city-states, if you like, and each city-state or big town or area had a king, and the kings met in conference to solve problems and work together. And so that particular social organization was fantastic because everybody worked together, including the city-states. The Sumerians, the concept of Sumeria came about about 2,700. The first Sumerian king was 2,700. That was a confederation of those city-states in that area when they'd become very prosperous and really grown. And when there were times of problem, times of trouble, times of massive climate change, times of mass migrations. So you see what I'm trying to say? We had the same kind of social organization laid down by the angels, archangels, and watchers from Karsag, and that was spread around the world, including the technology, including the attempts to produce very clever people by having bigger heads and bigger brains in order to solve the problems of the day.
I wanted to ask you about the head thing.
Yes.
As soon as you said that, I had a thought that I'd never really had before. If you look at the old upper and lower Egyptian crowns, if I get the right way around, I think the lower Egyptian crown is the large, tall, egghead-shaped crown. Maybe I've got it the wrong way around.
Skull.
Could it possibly be that the hat wasn't big, but maybe their head was?
I think we can't ignore the fact that if you are clever enough to domesticate all our important crops and all our important animals, which are quite different from our wild animals, and with the technology, for example, hybridization took place where there were people and knowledge, we still don't know how to get seeds from those hybridizations in many cases. If they could do all that, technology which is advanced or even more advanced than we are today, then there's every reason why they shouldn't try and produce bigger-headed people to help solve problems. Now, it may not have worked, I don't know, but certainly left the heads behind, the skulls behind. And there was a paranoia in Egypt in order to have the bloodline of the pharaoh. And I believe that was misunderstanding, misguided, but it may well have been based on the fact that the very cleverest people did have long heads. Certainly all the people who built the Great Pyramids, there was a distinct long head as opposed to round head. But with population dynamics, the whole idea of hereditary knowledge, hereditary anything is nonsense because the statistics are just unbelievable in terms of number of times and crossbreedings. Everything gets bred out, so to speak. But the large heads, the very large people, are a sign that something was happening which we don't quite understand, and that may well be because they knew a lot more about genetic modification of people than perhaps we do today.
I think I heard you mention, actually, speaking of different types of people, in an earlier interview, that in the scriptures they talk about the Anunnaki and the
Elohim
and the Nephilim, which is a giant human. And I think you alluded to something about the atmosphere being slightly different before one of these cataclysms.
Yeah, you've hit a nail on the head there, which is fascinating. And I don't have any doubt that there were very, very large, tall people because we have so many bones and so much evidence that it's rather stupid to deny it because they're there to be seen. And I don't care how many were forged. And to forge the number of large bones and skulls, who would bother to do it? It's there. It's part of our history. And, of course, the point I made in that previous interview was that when we had the cataclysm at 10,860, clearly a large part of our Earth's atmosphere was stripped off. We have an extinction of many of the large mammals, starting with the initial flash of the supernova at 39,000 BC, maybe a little before, and we have a wipeout of all the large mammals on the Australian side of the planet, including the giant kangaroo. In the Americas, we've still got giant sloths, giant saber-toothed tigers, mastodons, etc. And when scientists have carried out experiments with fish in tanks where they can increase the atmospheric pressure under which those fish live and feed, they found that under a much increased atmospheric pressure, those animals grow to twice the size and live twice as long. Now,
that is interesting. Then you go back to biblical times when you've got people living for 600 years.
Yeah, so that's got to be checked out. It's got to be. We mustn't close our mind to it. We've got to check it out and prove it right or wrong. Now, if we're worrying about Mars, for example, and looking at how similar Venus, Earth, and Mars actually are to each other in historical terms, if we did have a scattering of planets with the debris coming through our atmosphere at 10,600, if the Earth's atmosphere was seriously affected, certainly it's an explanation why Mars' atmosphere was seriously disrupted. And even a paper in the last week or so has shown that the Mars surface of Mars, the actual crystalline feature of the sands and the debris on the surface shows evidence of a massive heating of the surface, which turns everything crystalline, which is a fact that Mars may well have been just like the Earth. With the University of Ohio reproduced that ocean just looking at the contours, and we know there's enough water, frozen ice under the surface of Mars. We know there's a small atmosphere, and we know there are many features on Mars which we can't explain.
Like a pyramid. Something rather like a pyramid.
Yeah, I've looked at MarsAnomaly.com, and the Hale crater is a place to look. And nobody's explained to me what's in the bottom of the Hale crater, but there's every reason where we should actually take seriously the fact that life on Mars was far more recently disrupted or disturbed than up to now we've believed. No, we didn't even think there was water on Mars until a short time ago. Now we do.
Could it be that these pre-civilizations were in contact? Were they spacefaring, or did they even know each other existed?
Well, I've always kept an open mind. One of the first things somebody said to me when I first started, giving lectures and talks, they came up afterwards and said, "Do you realize that our circadian rhythms on our planet are exactly the same as those on Mars?"
Oh, really? No, but they have a different orbit and a different rotation speed, don't they?
Well, no, it's not so different. I didn't take that seriously, and then I thought about it, and I'm not going to dismiss it. I'm let somebody else work that one out. But the point is, we have to have some common sense and realize that what are the chances of us suddenly arriving a short time ago, and what we're really talking about is what are the chances the odds are that we've been around for a hell of a long time, and we've obviously discovered farming before and all sorts of things, but we've had an incredibly hostile planet on which to survive. And I think all the evidence and the excitement of the work that I do is to explain that the Anunnaki or the Elohim or whatever you like to call them, I think to call them the archangels, angels and watchers, the culture bearers, can teach us an awful lot. That's why we have them in our folk memory. That's why we think about them.
One thing I've heard you mention watchers a few times. Who are the watchers? The only ones I'm aware of would be people like the Magi and people like that. That wouldn't be the same type of watchers, would it?
No, as I say, there were three. There were the two-eyed serpents, the one-eyed serpents, and the watchers. And the word serpent had nothing to do with snakes, and that was one of the ways they've been written out of history, and their memories have been distorted. The word serpent is a whole combination of words based on the roots of SRP, SVP, etc. And it means wise man or woman. And so they're the wise man or woman. So when when Eve spoke to the serpent in the garden, she wasn't speaking to a snake. She was speaking to one of the wise men, probably one of the other archangels.
Right. So who were the Watchers then?
Well, the Watchers were the third order of craftsmen, and we have a reference in the books of Enoch, how 200 Watchers descended on Mount Jared, on Mount Hermon at the time of Jared. They were clearly reinforcements from somewhere to help the angels and archangels with their settlement. And they were the third order of craftsmen and are incredibly well organized. And we have the names of them, and we have all the names of what they did and almost how they did it. The books of Enoch are very important here. About 15 different people tried to translate the books of Enoch, which gave a very garbled message. And there was a man called Dr. Morfill who did a very good job, and one or two others. And O'Brien uses some of the best material before he went to work on the books of Enoch. And the point that O'Brien found was that as a professional surveyor, he suddenly realized that what the words were being used by the angels was rain gauge, measuring tapes, astronomy, etc. And then also, one of the most interesting points of all, how the angels were studying man and man's behavior and all man did, from a point of view of people, if you like, arriving in a new area on a new planet, perhaps. That's the way he put it. And of course, that was a crucial part of Enoch. The idea that angels were judging humans was used by the church to bring in the concept of original sin. And so Augustine of Hippo, Catholics, decided they were going to use that text of Eve, the sins of Eve, the woman in the Garden of Eden, and angels judging people.
Yes.
They thought, whoopee, we've got a great one there. We can tell everybody they're sinful and born sinful. But don't worry, come to us and pay a little bit of money and we'll forgive your sins.
What a nice deal.
I'd like to discuss that with every Catholic priest, every Anglican priest and the Pope.
Edmund,
I might not be burned as a heretic.
You may be waiting for your invite for a while.
I can't offer you a priest, but I could offer myself. I am a Catholic, and as a Catholic, I read something very interesting on your website, and I know I'm skipping ahead in history a little bit, but I've been dying to get to it, about this bloke called Jesus and his wife Mary Magdalene and the 3 kids. What's that about?
Yeah, good.
I never read that one in my Bible studies.
There we are. There we have another fact.
Oh, they missed that one, did they?
You won't. The chronology of the books, or the chronology of the Acts of Apostles, was that section was taken out quite deliberately. But I say quite openly and clearly that, and I've read Barbara Thiering's books, I've read Lawrence Gardner's books, I've done a lot of research on this, and I had to because Christian O'Brien wrote a book called The Path of Light, which is a translation of what Jesus was actually teaching his inner circle of disciples, which consisted of men and women after the crucifixion. Now, I had to do 2 years research on that, and I'm left with the conclusion, which O'Brien had, was that Jesus was teaching Surat Shabad Yoga, which is soul-word union, which was very advanced knowledge about the transmigration of the soul, which everybody believed in those days, or most people believed in those days. No doubt everybody will have their own view about that, but I personally think that Jesus was extremely important. He existed. His mission started in Britain because he was sent to Britain to be educated like all young men in that Mediterranean region.
Oh my God. But
there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus went probably to Bangor-on-Dee Druidic Academy. Pontius Pilate went to the Fourth Ingal Druidic academy. Pontius Pilate's guards were Scots guards. Joseph of Arimathea wasn't Arimathea, he was Haramateo, which meant he was the crown prince. He was Jesus' second brother. The party who came back to England with Joseph Haramateo, and I mean came back to England because we have evidence of them coming straight back after the crucifixion, was Britain was the one place which was safe for them to go because they had the price on their heads from throughout the Roman Empire and throughout Palestine. But each one of the 12 that came with Joseph Haramateo, or James the Just, Jesus' brother, they were given one hide of land each by Arivagus, and we think that was his name, but certainly he was the cousin or brother of Caractacus. And the only people who were given a hide of land were qualified druids. It was a very, very, very strict position, but 160, 170 acres of land did depend on the quality of the land. So the British king, the Pendragon, took over from Caractacus, thought that Jesus was sufficiently important and his teachings were sufficiently important for the party of 12 to be given a hide of land each. Now, that is one of the best recorded facts in British history, even appearing as a tax-free area of land in the Domesday Book. And when we begin to look hard at this and then think about the dates, think about what was going on at the time, it seems perfectly clear that British Christianity was very little different from the sophistication of Druidry, which was the masters of wisdom, as they were called by the Romans. Now, it took me a long time to come to this, but I put quite a lot of evidence on the website, and more will go on when we do a big revision of the website. But British Christianity was very close to the knowledge of the ancient world, a social organization. And the reason that Jesus went back to Palestine was because Palestine had been in chaos for many hundreds of years. You have the story of King Omri and the Cymry, those that didn't go into exile with the Abyssinians, coming to Britain. And the Welsh records are immensely important, have been overlooked, been written out by English scholars. And we have a fantastic story about Britain, the British. And you look at even Constantine, his role as a Briton with a mother who was a British princess. And the best support we have for more or less what I'm talking about comes from the Vatican historians, from Polydore Virgulo, who wrote a history for Henry VII. And remember, that was prior to the big fallout with the Church of Rome. And the fallout with the Church of Rome was over indulgences, was over massive wealth being accumulated by the Catholic Church in Britain, and the fact that France and Spain joined together to attack Britain. So Henry was forced to raise money to defend Britain. And it was a big falling out, and largely over the fact that Polydore Virgulo, who'd been the Pope's tax collector, had produced a history of Britain which had told the truth about the first church being in Britain and the role of Caractacus in Rome. The first Christian bishop in Rome was a son of Caractacus. We have a whole history there, which people like Michael Wood tell us that our history didn't start until the Romans had left. Voltaire was a great historian, and Voltaire said, history is the lie currently agreed upon. So right back to your point about Jesus having a family, the point about that family was that both Jesus' daughter, Jesus' sons, and the children of his brother, Joseph Haramateo, entered into the whole bloodline debate or tradition debate. And I've gone into this enormously carefully, as Lawrence did. Lawrence Scott, I'm afraid, had a very bad experience with somebody who wasn't telling the truth, but had used all the family trees and records of Europe to prove his own legitimacy to the British throne, which was proven to be false, which is very sad. But what Lawrence did do in the process was got an enormous amount of valuable information to allow him to put together an accurate record of a family tree. Now, the one thing in history that people did not want to destroy were their records of their ancestors. The Druids had to be able to remember 12 generations of their own ancestors. It was, I suppose, it was a form of ancestor worship, but it was also a realization how important our ancestors were to our very existence and survival, and about passing knowledge down from mother to son, mother to daughter, father to son, etc. And so I'm satisfied with the genealogy when it's properly checked out. It can be double-checked, treble-checked, quadruple-checked. The one record you can cross-reference does show that Jesus had 3 children, and he was, as a rabbi, he was supposed to have 3 children. As a rabbi, he had to be married. He may have even been married twice. There is so much information there. Lawrence Gardner wouldn't have written 7 or 8 books on this subject if Jesus had not existed. And my belief is that both Muhammad and Jesus didn't want new religions at all. They wanted to restore the Abrahamic faith, the old order of the Golden Age. Jesus did it very peacefully, although they did have some weapons at one point in time. They never really fought anybody. Jesus attempted to do it peacefully. Muhammad attempted to do it and had to fight everybody you saw, and was much more violent in what he attempted to do. But he was called the great general, the great king, the great governor, and they both wanted to get back to the Abrahamic faith. Muhammad's years were as much as anything about going through the books of the Jews, because they were the records that people had. There wasn't much else on record that they could rely on. And remember, Muhammad's wife was a merchant. Women played a major role in Mecca and Medina at the time of Muhammad. Women have been written out of the script, both in Christianity and in Mohammedanism or Islam. And the time is to come for us just to learn a few home truths and get some of these silly problems sorted out.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
I'm looking at Lawrence Gardner's page here on the ever helpful Wikipedia. There's mention of his talk about the Ark of the Covenant being a machine for manufacturing monatomic gold. I wonder if you had any thoughts on the Ark of the Covenant. Is that relevant to anything that you're talking about? Yes, it is.
It's an example of high technology.
Yeah.
To give you another example very quickly is if anybody goes to Thunderbolt, it's the Thunderbolt's website, very important, leading edge, electric universe, Walter Thornhill, the key figure, and you'll see a very, very clear presentation on YouTube showing that all our ancestors had symbols which were identical to the symbols that you can create in a laboratory of plasma. Proof that our ancestors understood plasma, understood the plasma universe, the electric universe. Absolutely fantastic new material to support what I'm saying. Lawrence picked up the idea, one of the key clues was the cylinders in Egypt, those cone-shaped cylinders, which were described as bread cake. And it was Sir Alan Gardner, the great linguist, who gave Lawrence the clue that those bread cake was in fact powdered gold, which was ingested. And led on this journey to Serebit Kalam, where anybody buying copper turquoise, other minerals, and Sinai, always had to pay for it in gold. And so the gold came in and the copper and other materials went out. And this is shown this is a quote in Kings in the Bible. And at Cerbit where the gold was stored, Petrie, the brilliant Sir Flanders Petrie, discovered the processing plant and the white powder at the top of Mount that particular extraordinary site. It ties in with ORM, orbital rearranged monatomic elements, and David Hudson. Lawrence did a fantastic amount of work. I was backwards and forwards to him at the time he was doing it. It isn't magic. It's just a realization that these people had far more advanced technology than us.
Oh, yeah. There's evidence of Egyptian batteries and everything, I think.
The Babylon.
Well, yes, certainly that's right. The Ark of the Covenant is described as a capacitor.
That's right. Yeah.
And I believe, I'm told, that one of the professors at Princeton University actually built a working model of it. But that's another story which needs researching. But the concept of actually eating gold, white powder gold, is important. Lawrence made the point to me, and it's way ahead above my head, but apparently all of us have a percentage in the dry matter of our brains. We have a percentage of the monatomic elements, the platinum group metals, which allow in physical terms moving into one or two or more different dimensions. Back to Sir Martin Rees, our chief astronomer. He says there are 32 or 23 different dimensions. So this is a whole area of science which we're just touching on, beginning to find our way.
But many people are speaking about other dimensions and other dimensional beings now, and it's becoming a common language. It's becoming common language at the moment. People are open to the idea.
Yeah.
But how it's done is a different story.
I think that's right. I think if we all work together and go step by step, then we'll make the discovery is needed. Hopefully, they will be a benefit to mankind. But I've been very impressed by the number of what I call extremely clever professionals with open minds who have tackled a lot of these subjects in the Bible. And I believe we've done a brilliant job in demonstrating beyond all reasonable doubt that our ancestors were capable of wonderful feats. They had incredible skills, incredible technology. As I said, they'd taken civilization and crops and domesticated animals around the world in a period of 2,000 years. And that required all sorts of interesting.
I've got one last question for you there, Edmund. You say that these people, these shining ones, helped take agriculture and technology back around the world post-Cataclysm. Is it safe to assume that those people might still be here or come back in case there is another cataclysm? Or have we expended these people? Have they gone now?
Well, my guide here is Christian O'Brien. And Christian O'Brien was he was probably the most successful exploration geologist in the last 100 years. His team found oil in Libya. He rewrote the geology books of the Rocky Mountains to allow BP to find oil in Canada and in Alaska. He was a brilliant man. He retired in 1971 and spent literally 30 years of his retirement studying the subjects that you and I are now talking about. And I continue his work because I believe he was a genius, and he hasn't put a foot wrong as far as I'm concerned. And I like to thoroughly check my sources before sticking my own neck out. But the point is, he had the option of what I believe, you can sum it up by saying that it's not religion at all. Religion is irrelevant. The word religion is a modern invention. Our ancestors weren't religious. What they sought to do was to raise their level of consciousness to the highest possible levels, and they worked on that. And they did that as much as anything for the survival of humanity as a whole as for their own survival. And in raising their levels of consciousness, they learnt to use their brains in ways that we can't use our brains today. And it may well be, and O'Brien felt that it was possible to go out of body. He used to go to meditate every day at 5 o'clock. And I've no shame in saying that he told me that he was able to go out of body and travel out of body to the 2 lower astral regions. This is a man who was totally practical, incredibly thorough, and yes. he wouldn't have said that to me if he wasn't telling the truth. Everything else he said, as far as I'm concerned, was solid. Yeah. So I have to take that option seriously. But that is something that appears in the records all around the world. And Tibetan monks say they can do it today. I don't know. That's right. But that's other people to tell me whether that's possible, and for scientists to venture to latch onto it. But where that leads us to is the fact that in an electric, magnetic universe, we can communicate. We don't need to get in a spacecraft to go places. We can actually communicate. And Walter Thornhill himself said that we now have sufficient knowledge of the science of space to realize that a message can go across the universe in a flash. It's not governed by the speed of light, and come back to us.
But if there was a cataclysm tomorrow, then who would help us? That's what I was thinking, because it seems these people have been around for more than one cataclysm. I would have thought maybe it was safe to assume they were still there.
Well, the intelligence is almost certainly there. If we look at all the capabilities of microbes and the difficult living conditions and space as a whole, and then we've discovered that life floats around in the universe and the atmosphere. And whether people want to find intelligent life on Earth is another matter. But the point is that we know that our universe is intelligent and responsive. And it's how we can plug into that. And I think what message from O'Brien was, yes, we can plug into that. And that is quite a section within the Shining Ones on that particular subject from people who know a lot more about that subject than I do. But clearly, there's a lot more for us to learn. Just think how much we've learned in the last 300 years. And the next 300 years, we can learn a lot more. But let's try and learn how we can work together, remove the divisions of politics and religion, and just what good we can bring to our fellow man and the planet by managing it properly and doing unto others as we would have them do unto us.
On that note, Edmund, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, because it was a lovely saying. It was very nice, and you've certainly raised our consciousness today. Your information is incredible. We couldn't possibly get through it in a couple of hours. But can we just tell people what the site is? Have you any plans for the future, Edmund? Anything coming up that you're doing? Any talks or anything?
Well, I've got I have to apologize for not doing any talks. I have more video lectures in the pipeline.
Nice.
I've done 10. I've got as far as I can go initially. I will be doing more video lectures. I'm working on a new website which will bring everything up to date. And what I haven't done, there's no point in having a golden age if you can't explain how you create a golden age.
Yes.
So what I'm busy doing is compiling and putting a lot of information together, how we can solve problems, because you can talk until the cows come home, but if you don't have some good ideas to put into practice, and I've learned how difficult it is to move the political establishment in this country on even the simplest things. And I think that we have got a great awakening, a great consciousness. People want the best for each other in the world. We've had enough of fighting, enough of wars, enough of divisions. And I think religion can lead the way. If only the religions can get back to their base. So number one is for the religions to get back to their base, which is, as Jesus said, "Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you." And Confucius said exactly the same thing 400 or 500 years before. And all you have to do is make sure you do it. But we need to be able to manage and run our country, our planet, our wildlife, our people in a really constructive, helpful way, and not have everybody waving spears at each other.
Edmund, your website is www.goldenageproject.org.uk. Have you got any other information people can look up? Do you have other websites that you can recommend or that you own?
The Thunderbolts is very important on technology. That's very important. I think it's just keep looking. It'll soon have more information on my own website. But the most important thing of all is, Buddha makes the point about following the shining ones. But Buddha was the man who said, "Don't believe anything you hear. Keep an open mind and work it out for yourself."
Excellent advice, I think.
And the web, and guys like you who are bringing this information out on the web, you're the ones who are going to change the world, because we all need to listen to each other and look at these issues and get on the right tracks in terms of what our history is, and then we can make these changes and build a better world.
Well, thanks, Edmund. We couldn't do it without people like yourself talking to us. And
no,
thanks. So I can't thank you enough for today.
Thanks for coming on, Edmund.
A great pleasure, and thank you for asking me.
Brilliant, excellent. Thank you very much. That was Edmund Marriage.
That was fantastic. My God.
So much information, my mind is melting.
I asked one question about Jesus, and I think we had another show out of it. I'd like to get him back on and just take him to book on all of that.
We could have just started again. Okay, well, that's it for the show, everybody.
We've kept you long enough, our dear audience and listeners, for 1 week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. We'll take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird. You're listening to Alternative Future Radio, home of the weird, resting place of the paranormal. We'll take you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and beyond. Strange phenomena, aliens, psychics, cryptozoology, conspiracy, holistic health, and UFOs. Alternative Future Radio, where spooky just got weird.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another startling edition of the Out There Hour.
The Out There Hour on Alternative Future Radio. The Out There Hour with Basil and Mark. www.alternativefutureradio.com.
Yay!
Good morning.
Good evening.
And good afternoon.
To the Middle East.
Africa.
America.
The world.
And whoever's in between.
Interesting show today.
Very fascinating today. Lots of topics. Lots of topics.
Lots of topics involved. It's quite complicated.
Yeah, it's going to be a long one.
It's going to be a long one. I'm going to try and wrap it up in a nutshell as best I can.
Oh, do it.
What if we were
yes,
an advanced civilization?
What if one day, maybe?
In the ancient times.
Aha.
And we faced a great global catastrophe.
Yep.
Which wiped out most of the human race.
Yes.
And left a few stragglers.
Stragglers, yeah.
And left us with great constructions like the pyramids and Stonehenge.
Yep.
And things like that.
Yep, Mayan pyramids.
And nobody can remember what they're for.
They don't really seem to have a great use. Some of them, certainly.
That's roughly what the show is about. But we're going to have...
and what happened... What happened to us? What happened to them? Where did we come from? What's coming next?
And a little bit about a guy called Jesus.
Oh, yeah, Jesus, yeah. I remember him, married guy, 3 kids.
That's him. That's the one.
Rabbi, I think he was.
Yeah.
Well,
should we get our wonderful guest, Edmund?
Edmund Marriage is on the show, everybody. He is an expert in such things. We're going to get him on shortly. After what?
Advert.
Yeah, I hope you'll excuse me. I just wanted to play the piano just a little bit here, and I hope you don't mind. In fact, my nurse Chloe is going to join me on the flute here for just a little bit, if that's okay with you. I just thought that it would be time to do something fun here in the music room. But you don't have to listen to things like this. There are better things you could be listening to, like alternative future radio. And it's so easy now with their new Android application. You could download it for just $1.99. And then you wouldn't have to listen to me play the piano. And my nurse Chloe play her flute. Find out more at alternativefutureradio.com. It's just $1.99. And PayPal will even bill you in your currency if you're not smart enough to be using dollars.
You can find more information on that on the Golden Age Project website, on the technical detail.
Mm-hmm. That's very important, Edmund, because at the moment the solution to climate change seems to be paying carbon taxes to the European Union. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, I'm afraid I followed this. I went to the first ever climate change meetings in this country in a political advisory capacity, and I said that it is the sun which is driving our climate, and that even if we did want to change things, we could never afford to do it. I'm glad to say that last year, CERN and the scientists at CERN in Switzerland confirmed the research of the Danish Space Agency, a man called Svenmark, in particular, and confirmed this cosmic ray theory, proved it. But of course, our scientists are so blinkered and stuck on their mistakes, they don't want to change their minds. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today.
There is a climatologist stroke weatherman called... sorry. There was a little delay there. There's a climatologist stroke weatherman called Piers Corbyn. You may have heard of him. He's been going on for some years saying that the sun is the source of climate change and it affects the weather and so on and so forth, a lot more than people believe. And as you say, you took the words out of my mouth. Recently there have been some instances of proof towards that, and I've been convinced of that for years, that the sun was linked to weather, because even basic research, you can see very quickly that there is a correlation between sunspots and weather patterns. How that's not generally accepted science is unbelievable.
Well, Piers Corbyn is one of the leading voices, independent thinkers, and we all have to make our own minds up about things and not follow blindly what we're told and taught.
Yeah.
And of course, the real issue is CO2 harmful? Of all the greenhouse gases, CO2 amounts to 0.04% of the total, and it's the heaviest one, so it's sitting close to the ground anyway, where it's needed by the plants.
Yes.
And so most of the greenhouse gas is water vapor, 85-90%.
Yeah.
And so the whole argument is totally unsound if you actually look and see that CO2 is highly beneficial and it's what feeds our forests, our plants, our rainforests, etc.
The statistics I heard, Edmund, were that humans only create around about 7% of the world's CO2, and of that 5% is locked in water. Is that about right?
I'm sure that's about right. And then you have a super volcano or a big volcano going off in Iceland and putting out more CO2 in a short space of time than we have for hundreds of years. And it's the same argument that the 1/3 of the CO2 on the planet was being caused by peat bog fires in Indonesia, where people were clearing the rainforest to plans of human survival. And we go back actually if we go back to the Holocene climatic optimum, we're going back to 4,200, say, when the planet was much warmer than it is now. And that's the time where we see the first farmers coming from the Near East, simply because farming had been so successful, the population expanded, and people migrated with their city-state sophistication and arrived on the coast of Ireland at Side Fields, which is Ceide, Side Fields. We have the first evidence of really sophisticated organization, communal organization in rectangular fields, large fields, stone walls, forests cleared for the mixed farming system. And then, of course, the climate changed, and the whole of that area is now covered by 5 or 6 feet of peat.
Yeah.
And so our whole history, going back to, for a long while, let's say to the start of the Holocene. Now, the start of the Holocene was 9,400, 9,500 BC, after the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, which I'll come to the cause of that in a minute. But we've had so many ups and downs, and it means that populations of people have thrived and prospered under good climatic conditions, and then been wiped out by natural catastrophes or by disease or by bad weather. And so the human populations over the last 10,000 years have moved backwards and forwards to the favorable areas in which to live. But most of the diffusion has come from the Near East, so the Eastern Mediterranean. And so the Eastern Mediterranean has fed the world with people and technology and skills, etc.
So historically speaking, So historically speaking, climate change is nothing new.
Climate change, climate's been always changing in the past. It's changed incredibly severely and rapidly, not due to man-made activities, but to the variations in solar activity, which is about the variations in what's arriving in our solar system from space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the key is the sunspots, whether there are a lot or whether there aren't any, the heliosphere, which protects us from radiation. And when the sun is weak, the heliosphere is weak, and then the cosmic rays come through the heliosphere. Our own planet's magnetic field is weaker, and if we get loads of cosmic rays, that creates low-level clouds, and those low-level clouds cause the sea temperatures to cool, and the sea temperatures, when they're cooled, get the land to cool, and we have the snow, if you like, rather than warmer weather. So it's a very complex chain of events. And our scientists need to look at the big picture of our whole Milky Way system, and we duck and dive through areas where we have stronger and weaker cosmic radiation. And yes, if we look back on the conventional records, in other words, conventional archaeology, we're told that we don't have any humans going back the female side about 150, 180,000 BC, the mitochondrial Eve. And then we're told that Adam came along much later, and that everybody on the planet, whatever color, whatever they are, has a line back to a single male Y chromosome marker called the 158 marker at about 50 to 60,000 BC. So Adam came a long time after Eve, and that's accepted by the establishment. The other thing that's accepted by the establishment is that the first two chromosomes are fused, but nobody seems to tell us what effect that has on us, other than the fact that the fusing of a chromosome is not a mutation. It's something that can only be done, if you like, by advanced technology. So that sets the stage for a Cro-Magnon man, who clearly had a large brain, was very tall, taller than us, and we see all the Cro-Magnon peoples around the west coast of Africa, Spain, France, on the Atlantic seaboard, and all of a sudden our toolkit, if you like, has jumped from 10 or 11 basic objects to maybe as many as 100 different specific tools that can be identified at about 40,000 BC. But over that period of time, from say 40,000 BC to now, the planet's climate has been very hostile, with massive swings in temperature. And many scientists will tell you now, and again, straight-line academic specialists will tell you that the planet was so hostile that it's very unlikely that agriculture could have taken place anywhere back to about 50,000 BC. But the one candidate we have for agriculture is the area of the Azores, warmed by a warm current from the Gulf of Mexico, etc., and where we can look at coral and ocean temperatures. And during, for example, the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age, then were reasonably favorable conditions, maybe even for 2 crops a year for anybody living on a large island on the site of the Azores.
Well, Dr. Webster Tarpley mentions, he's a historian, and he mentions weather as well. And he says in the Middle Ages in Britain, it was warm enough to grow tropical fruit. But and then at a later stage in Britain, at the 18th century, there was people skating on the Thames. It was so deeply frozen, and actually having fairs and markets on it.
That's right. That was called the Maunder minimum, when we had no sunspots at all, and when the Thames froze over, and it was an incredibly difficult period in time.
Okay, so hopefully on the line we should now have Mr. Edmund Marriage. Do we have you there, Edmund?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent, excellent. How are you today, Edmund?
I'm very well indeed, very well. Been looking at my notes on your website and all ready to go.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Now, actually, I want to start off with a small tale, because I actually got an email back from, I think it was from yourself, in regard to an inquiry. I was actually looking for a chap called, let me get this right, was it Lawrence Gardner? And he's written a number of books on, I was looking for somebody to talk about the Holy Grail. And his name came up.
That's right, Lawrence Gardner.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, he's since died, which is, well, regrettable, obviously. Right. But we were talking about this with somebody the other week. We were looking for guests from all sorts of different things around the world, different topics, and a disproportionate amount of them had actually died, and he was the one who actually spurred me on to mention it on the show just the other week, because about 40% of the people that we found that we wanted to interview were no longer alive.
Don't worry, Edmund. I'm sure you're safe.
We must stop telling guests this on air, because I think we're going to freak them out a little bit. But yeah, the Holy Grail was where we started on this. But I mean, where do you want to go on this, Edmund? Shall we say start at the beginning? Is that too far away?
Is it even possible?
That's right. Lawrence Gardner was a dear friend of mine, and I saw a lot of him over the last 5 or 6 years, particularly the year up to his death last year. And I thought his work was extremely important. It was very, very well referenced. An incredible amount of work and something like 8 or 9 books which sold extremely well. And I get a terrific amount of feedback from people who want to know about Lawrence's work.
Yeah.
And so I've found his work valuable, and I'm helping to promote The Origin of God, which has gone out now, but the next book is called The Revelation of the Devil, which was his last book. And that's due literally any moment now from the printer. And that will tell the story of how we believe in the devil or don't believe in the devil. And that's full of excitement for people who want to round off the whole subject of where religion has got us to in terms of control and misinformation, which is very sad, because while we have divisions, religious divisions on this planet and political divisions, things can only get worse. And I'll come back to that about the Golden Age, where there was no need for anybody to argue about religion or politics. And religion, in fact, didn't even exist as we know it. And so the Lawrence Gardner angle is particularly important when we're working through to see what we need to change today to make the world a better place.
Okay, Edmund, now I spoke to you a bit earlier, just before we start recording, and I think to sum it up in one line, your research and your website, we were an advanced civilization. There was a global catastrophe.